But I think, again, I may be wrong, and maybe I'm just making this too complicated. But I do think if you buy a wrench from a dollar store, it's a wrench from a dollar store. It's going to last you a week. If you buy a DeWalt tool, well, it's going to last you a lifetime. And I think it'd be wrong to say, I have a screwdriver and it's really, really good when you bought it from a dollar store. Yeah, it could be good for a day, maybe just one use, but it's a dollar store tool. But if it works for you, that's fine. But what all these stages and what these stages of nothingness have in common is this: that what you had in the past will no longer work. In nothingness there is desert. In nothingness there is loneliness. In nothingness there is pain. In nothingness, it's darkness. It really is complete darkness, and you're looking for a silver lining. And a silver lining is nothing like it's 2 a.m, you wake up, there is nothing. It's 3 a.m, you wake up and you look out there, it's dark. Again, you wake up at 4 a.m, and there is this, it's not completely light and it's not completely dark. There is this line between light and dark, you see. That's the silver lining. And with that silver lining, what you have is hope that the darkness slowly going away. And maybe the silver line, this line can become a paragraph. It could become then a page, and it could become a complete book. And before you know it, the sun is completely out. And there is no darkness at all. And I think as long as you know the anatomy, again, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in a physical or an emotional or a psychological or the spiritual. The only, again, difficulty with the spiritual is that it's mostly dark. It's mostly dark, and you have to summon up a great amount of willpower to bring light into it. And that requires you to really, really pay attention, to really be open, to make a good amount of sacrifices, because you want to understand, because eventually you have to come back to your body if you've been on the spiritual quest, and to some extent you have journeyed and completed certain stages on the spiritual quest. And there is something else that I think it's important to point out, which is, some people are in the physical and experience the physical nothingness, but they have never been to the emotional and the emotional nothingness. So they have no access to it. But if you have been to the physical and the nothingness and the emotional, you have access to the people and the physical and the nothingness that they go through. Then you have another layer of people who have been through the physical, through the emotional, through the intellectual. It's a hierarchy. They have power. They have insights. They have wisdom about the life and the lifelessness of the physical. They have power and wisdom and insights about what happens when someone who is physical wants to go to the emotional. And they also have power over those who are emotional, in the emotional stage, that they identify themselves with the emotions that they have, And so as you go higher, you can see what's below you much better. And so the idea that, well, it's my opinion, and my opinion is just as good as yours, that's actually not true. Because the more mature you are, and the better you see. I think other problem that is facing us is there is this assumption now that everybody has the capacity to go from the physical to emotional. That everybody has a capacity and is talented enough to go from the emotional to the intellectual. And everybody has the capacity to go through the physical, emotional, intellectual, and then journey on the spiritual. And I don't think it's true. I think everything in life has its own capacity. I have all these DeWalt tools. They are cordless. They come with batteries. And the more expensive the saw, the more complicated the saw. It may be the same size battery, but the inner workings and the inner components of the battery is different. So if you have bought, for example, a saw for, say, $90, it comes with a battery, and that battery will be charged and it'll work for, I don't know, maybe an hour of sawing things. Okay. There is another saw with another battery. On the surface, they look exactly the same. But this battery will work for you for about 6 hours. And the mistake often made is that this battery looks at this battery and says, you and I are the same size. We have the same writing. We are the same color, same shape, which means that I can actually do something to myself to make myself work 6 hours instead of just one. And the truth is, that's not true. And I think in an environment where equality is sold, that all of us are equal, we are equal in the sense that we're all cups that you can hold, a certain amount of liquid. That's true, that you are a cup and I'm a cup, but I can only, hold 6 ounces, whereas you can hold maybe 5 gallons. But do you hold the same thing? Your capacity is just bigger and more. So, and I think it's important to consider that, because those really who just have the capacity to be physical, because they lack self-knowledge and because they're really uneducated and because nobody has really explained things to them in the right way, what they do, they begin to envy and they begin to resent and they begin to become jealous and angry at, say, a brother or a sister or a father or a friend, perhaps, who has the capacity to be emotional. I remember for many years I was immensely jealous of my brother because, he had a very expansive vocabulary. Even now, he teaches in ways that it's really quite amazing. He reads all the time. He does research. And when he goes to classes, he just throws out so much data. When he teaches psychology or sociology, it's, and every time, I see him, he says, I was reading this experiment that was done in, 1800 or even before humanity was born. And sometimes I sit back and say, wow, I wish I could do that. It would make my classes perhaps a bit more interesting. And then I came to realize, after having met Hussein and realizing that I'm interested in, life, but this particular area of life, and I can only do it, express it in this particular way. When I realized my capacity and what I'm talented, in some ways, then my envy just subsided. I was able to kind of sit back and enjoy what my brother was talking about in regards to what he had read in a book about this or that. But, when you live in an environment where people are sold this idea that they're entitled, and if they work hard, they can get to A, B, C, D. And the difficulty with thinking in this way, since the three of you are, professors and you are in the classroom and you read essays, is that you have a 20-year-old who writes beautifully, and that's great. A 20-year-old has zero experience in life. They kind of said they have a talent to write well, string words well together, but they don't really understand anything. They just know that, they write very poetically. And so as an instructor, having been through, the physical, emotional, perhaps psychological, intellectual, you kind of just look at this essay and you say, man, I wonder how highly they must think of themselves. And you kind of get stuck. Should I give them an F because they talk about things they don't understand? Should I give them an A because they write really, really well, but they don't really understand? And then you say, what the hell, let me just give them an A. At least, this person is saying something. That other loser of a student says nothing, absolutely so. But you treat the person who writes an A essay and the F essay both equally. One just writes well, but it doesn't really mean anything. There is this passage, I'm not quite sure which gospel it's in. It's when, for the first time, Jesus goes to Jerusalem, to the temple, and meets Zerah, who is a scribe. And Zerah comes forth, and, Jesus is screaming and shouting, telling people that they've made the temple of God into a marketplace. And Zerah looks at him and says, oh, Master, it's good to finally meet you. Are you here to destroy this place? And he says, you destroy it, I'll build it in 3 days. And Zerah says, really, it took 1,000 years to build this. You really think you can build it in 3 days? And Jesus looks at him and says, you say well, you just don't understand. And Zerah gets really offended. He leaves, and Judas looks at him and says, was it really wise to offend Zerah? He has one of the best minds. And Jesus looks at him and says, you need to open your heart, Judas, not your mind. Open your heart. And it's such a difficult thing to ask of someone, that I don't really care what he says, how he says it. I don't really care how many books he has scribed, how much he knows. None of those things mean anything. And so it kind of puts a damper on a lot of things.
Opening your heart puts a damper on a lot of things?
Well, when a 20-year-old writes you a very, very good essay, and you know that, and you're beyond the reflective or the emotional self, at the end of all these stages, whether physical, emotional, or intellectual, you're eventually going to reach this land that contains nothing. It makes everything that you have done in your life completely meaningless, without value. So this person has written you a really, really good essay. And it contains a good amount of emotions. It also contains a good amount of examined life, as Socrates would say. But you don't care for those things, because eventually you know that this person is going to reach a place. Hopefully not, but eventually we'll reach a place where they say, yeah, I've written 10 books, but they don't really mean anything. Consider the life of Khalil Gibran, a great poet. I don't know how he looked. I don't know if those pictures are an actual depiction of, his physical self. He was a nice-looking man. I'm sure he was alive to all the parties that people had for him, and the ones that he himself had created for others. He would drink all the time. He died relatively young. You know, I mean, why do you drink? You know, you have written all these books. You know, you have done so much in your short little life. And once in a while, maybe you enter this place of nothingness and there's a good amount of pain. And there is nothing you can do with this pain. You can't write it. You can't talk it. You can't party it. So you just drink. You know, and the moment you drink, what you're saying is, why don't I just go and sit and read my own work about joy and sorrow, about loneliness? He could have read his own works, and his I think even, you know, because what happens usually when you write like Khalil Gibran is you're really having an out-of-body experience. You're out of your body, you're out of your emotions, you're out of your intellect. You're just inspired to write. And then your life, and remember, the human flesh can't contain that inspired spirit for too long. It's just not possible. It's like grief. You can cry only for so long before you just, you know, run out of tears, and your body needs to rest. And then after an hour or two, then you can cry some more, you know. And so what happens, Gibran writes, and then his body says that's enough, and he gets shut down. He can no longer think, he can no longer write, he can no longer feel. And then you have days where you're just out of it, you're sad. You can read your own work, they're not really your own work. But that work has the power to inspire the author. Why doesn't he do it? Because it's not that his physical body has entered nothingness. It's not because his emotional body has entered into nothingness. It's not that his intellectual body has entered into nothingness. This is a man who has tasted the spiritual nothingness, and what happens when something overtakes him and puts him in a place where he can write poetry. But that he can't reach. And so out of desperation he just drinks. I mean, it's really a terrifying and inspiring place to be as someone like Gibran. You know, even if you were to look at, I mean, I don't know if Jesus existed. I don't know how true the New Testament, the four Gospels are, but let's just say that they are true. Every single word in the four Gospels are true. The idea that this man walks around completely empty, so much so, and he has a good amount of faith inside him without being aware of the faith, of course. He just walks around and just listens, and all of a sudden says, you know, you may be looking at a human being, but the truth is God lives inside this shell, and so you're looking at God. So when he says, you know, if you want to get to God, the kingdom of God, you have to go through me, he's absolutely right. You have to look beyond the person, beyond the physical, emotional, intellectual. And it's really, really difficult, because down here, Alison, we need something to worship, because we can't reach the Spirit, we can't reach God, we can't reach transcendence. It's not possible. We need someone down here, and Jesus did that for people. And if you look at his experience in the Garden of Gethsemane, if you look at his experience on the cross, not the version where he says, you know, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, but where he says, you know, I feel abandoned. You know, you put me in the desert. You fill me with your own breath or your spirit. You push me back into society. I am abused. I am beaten, I am harassed by society, they put me on this cross, I have nothing. And I'm looking for faith and it's not there. I'm looking for God, it's not there. I'm looking for spirit, it's not there. Even someone as lofty and as noble, as spiritual, if you will, as Jesus Christ, catches himself falling back into the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual, but quickly catches himself and says, no, it's my physical pain, true. And that physical pain creates emotions, true. And I'm trying to think what I have done to be deserving of this. And then he gives up and says, no, that's a futile attempt. I'm just going to give myself to God and say, thy will be done. I apologize. You know, not everybody needs to work for spiritual salvation. There is nothing wrong with, helping people find intellectual salvation or psychological salvation or emotional salvation or physical salvation. And I think it's, in many ways it would have been good to have kept the New Testament in hiding, so people don't mistake, an emotional quest for a spiritual one, or a physical quest for a spiritual one, or an intellectual quest for a spiritual one. Now everything is confusing, and it creates a good amount of self-deception.
It just doesn't seem so like clean cut where if you can't, I mean, obviously most people are not going to progress to that stage, the spiritual stage. So most of us are stuck in this physical, emotional, intellectual hierarchy. But like if you get to a place where you are able to see things more clearly, how do you just exist in that without like...
Well, when you see things clearly, it's not like it's a clean walk away from the things that you see but you don't want in your life, or you don't want to be in that particular space. You may be able to see a lot of things, but it's the only world you know, and you'll try to fix the world that creates a good amount of issues or problems or complications for you. I think all of us, without exception, there are areas in our life where we see certain things very, very, very clearly. But it doesn't mean that you kind of one day wake up and say, okay, I'm just going to get rid of that. It doesn't work like that. You know, the things that you see very clearly create a good amount of issues for you, and they keep you occupied for a long, long time. It's not so much seeing things clearly, it's, see, when you see something clearly, there's a good amount of pain that's involved. I mean, it creates a good amount of pain, and that, now you have two things, the thing you see and the pain that seeing creates. And now you have to kind of wrestle with both of them now. You have to wrestle with the thing you see and you want to correct. Oftentimes you can't. And you have to deal with the pain that it causes inside you. And there is nothing that you can do about that. Then comes the next problem, which is you want to fix the problem, you can't. You want to fix the emotion, but you can't. And then you say to yourself, am I really that incompetent? Now you begin to bite your own self. You begin to wrestle your own self, and you begin to beat yourself up. Now you got 3 issues on your hand. You know, you have a boyfriend who's an idiot, okay? You have the emotions that he creates inside your life, okay? And then you also want to fix both of them, but you can't, so you feel incompetent. You feel like held hostage. So every time you look yourself in the mirror, you have a good amount of disgust for yourself, for the emotions, and for the person in your life. You know? And should someone come to you and say, well, you know, Jesus Christ said A, B, C, D, now your hatred goes beyond yourself. It kind of leaks into Jesus Christ as well. I hate that guy too. What the hell does he know? You know, one of the problems, I think, of, say, the allegory of the cave, maybe Plato was really old when he was, you know, writing this story. Maybe intellectually he wasn't equipped enough to kind of unpack the story well. It would have been really, 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 really nice if he detailed the struggles of the chained man, you know, that the love he had for his parents, who were also in chains, the love he had for his brothers and sisters, for his friends, for his land. He didn't detail those things. And then he didn't say anything about what happened to the man who all of a sudden began to ask questions. He didn't say how or why. He even began to ask these questions. And you know, when you leave these things out, then you have idiots on campus coming to a classroom and just talking about the stories, and people say, oh, well, that's a really nice story, you know, but it's a heart-wrenching story because there is so much loss and grief and loneliness, you know, in that story. And he doesn't detail what happens when, you know, he's able to kind of just move his head around and for the first time coming to realize, you know, everything was a Truman Show. I mean, that's a realization and a clarity that's, you know, it puts you into anguish. You don't really want to see. You know, there was a show on TV, I forget the name, but I think the mom had cancer or something, and she had to, you know, have some blood transfusion. And the daughter goes to the doctor and says, I am her daughter. I think we, you know, share the same blood type. And the doctor comes back and says, I'm sorry, you know, you were adopted. And it's the first time, you know, she's believed that this has been her biological mother for the past like 50 years. It's the first time. It's like a jolt to your system. What the hell do you do with that information? You know, not only do you have, you know, this person you love and care for, You claim, assume to be your mom. Not only do you have to witness her slowly decaying and dying, but you also have to wrestle with this news that you're biologically not hers. And then you have to wrestle with, why did they lie to me? And then, what the hell do you do with the anger, the hate, the disgust? Who do you talk to? The pretend father now, the pretend sister now? Plato doesn't say what happens when the guy completely breaks free of the chains and walks away from his parents, walks away from his kids, walks away from, the friends and the people. Doesn't say any of that stuff. And Plato doesn't say how lonely it is once you break free, and you look to your right, you don't have anyone accompanying you. You look to your left, nobody's accompanying. You have to do this whole thing on your own.
But it's also a story of someone who made it to the light and got to get to that stage and come back. But if not everybody makes it up, then technically there's a bunch of people walking around who have been unchained but can't make it to the surface, right?
Well, the thing is, once you break free of the chains, it's very difficult for you to go back and say, please chain me up. Because now what happens is, it's what in the Quran called is Abn Sabil, which is you can no longer go back to the world of being held in bondage, and you don't have access to the mouth of the cave where light exists, where your freedom is, and so you're stuck. You can't go back, you can't go forward. But that may be so, but the point was, it's good to detail the emotions. So, because what usually happens, let's say someone says, okay, well, divorce. He's abusive or she's abusive. Just walk away from the marriage. Okay. Well, if you want me to get a divorce, at least educate me. What happens when I go home and there is no one there? How do I deal with the loneliness? How do I deal with the loss? Not just the loss of a man or a woman, but being the first in the family to divorce. Having the loss of dreams, hopes. I mean, you have loss at so many different layers, so many different places, and they're all each very, very unique. You lost your health in marriage, that's fine. You'd get a divorce. And now you have lost companionship. Now you have to be a companion to loneliness and despair and depression. What the hell do you do with that? And then what you have is friends basically telling you, time will take care of this. Well, that's very, very true, but how do you cope while it's just, going through you like a hurricane? I think it's important to be educated how you feel in bondage and how you feel in liberation when you're no longer chained, because they create different set of emotions and you have to deal with them differently. The movie American History X with Norton something, that's the guy who played that character. He's part of this cult, white supremacist. And, he just hates people of color. And one night this black kid, breaks into his house. He comes down with a gun and just shoots the guy. He ends up in prison. And what he comes to realize is that he believed that white people are noble people, the most noble people. They should never mix with any other race, any other color, because that will kind of contaminate who and what they are. And to his surprise, when he enters, the prison system, he comes to realize, white people have brown friends and yellow friends and black friends, and he doesn't know what to do with that. And so he has a big mouth. He goes around telling them, "What are you guys doing? These people are below us. You can't hang out with them." And he's new, so because he's new, he doesn't know how to think about this stuff, and he doesn't have the language. And so every time he opens his mouth, he just makes his own people pretty upset. And so one day, as he's showering, his own people come and teach him a lesson. And it's a very painful lesson. And then the person who rescues his life in prison is a black guy, and they become best buddies. And the point I'm trying to, and then he is, freed from prison, he comes to realize his brother now is part of the group that he belonged to at one time. And so he goes to educate his brother that, listen, all people are good. Give them a chance, whether they're white or black or blue or yellow. It doesn't really matter. Give them a chance. And again, and you can't expect movies or books, including Plato, to talk about all of this stuff, but you have this belief, and it's a home for you. It creates a home for you. That the only people worth being alive are white people. It's a shortcut. You don't have to go around figuring out what diversity is. That's too much work. His life is simple. He goes to prison and things become complicated. If white people think, for example, that whites are superiors, why are they hanging out with these other people? And it's a world he doesn't understand. And the writers of this movie don't really come out and explain the sort of emotion, because it is a very traumatic thing to witness. And then another part is his best friend becomes, an African American. These are all different things that you witness, and they transform you. And they're enlightening, but they're also quite terrifying, because they're pushing you into a world you've never been, you've never understood, you've never even imagined. So it takes some adjustment. Even I think if you read the first couple of pages of Daughter of Fire, I think it's the introduction, where, the introduction is usually something you write when the book is complete. So what happens is Irina throughout the book talks about how beautiful love is, and how grand love is, and how everybody should fall in love, and how everybody should find a teacher. That's what she just says in the book, despite all the heartbreaks that she also expresses. But when the book is done, all 900 pages, she says, well, it's time to write like a very, very brief introduction. It doesn't need to be 50 pages long. So it's only 2 pages. And in it she says, yeah, I'm going to go to Home Depot and I'm going to buy a gong. I'm going to buy a drum and stand outside and just bang this, drum really, really hard and loud and say, those of you who want to enter the gates of love, don't do it. It's a warning. Don't do it. It's not worth it. And that's what happens when you understand something really, really well, and what you have to go through once you enter the gates.